Beside her is Fernando Manuel Castro, who is formerly the director of SINERGIA, Colombia's National Program for Monitoring and Evaluation, and who's now with us in IEG, continuing to support very much our region and our work in this area as well as beyond it in the bank. I'm Louise Cord. I didn't introduce myself to start with. For those of you who I don't know, I'm the sector manager from the Poverty and Gender Group here in LAC. And to the left of me, I had all these papers, is Pablo Iberan, who is a lead economist in the Office of Strategic Planning and Development and Effectiveness at the IDB. This work that we're presenting with you today is part of a joint partnership that I'll speak about briefly that we have together with the IDB and IEG here in the bank. And Pablo coordinates impact evaluations for social sector projects, supports teams in M&E throughout the project cycle. He joined the IDB in 2004, and he got his BA from CIDE in Mexico and his PhD from Berkeley. And to the far left is Jaime Saavedra, who's the sector manager of the Poverty and Equity Group in the Premenca, who formerly, I think, was one of the founding fathers of this network that we'll be discussing today and the work that we're sharing with you today, and is now working together with Gladys to take it at a global level and to support it throughout the bank and other regions. So thank you all for joining. And let me just give Is this mic on? Yeah. Okay. I was asked to give a bit of an introduction to this network, which is the host or the framework for the work that we're going to share with you today. And I just wanted to take a step back and talk about where this agenda has come very briefly through the recent years. What we've been seeing in the region is a huge growth in the demand for monitoring and evaluation. I think it's a testimony to see all of you who are here today, as governments want to make sure that their programs are effective, and as there's increasing public interest in ensuring the transparency and accountability of government programs. So over the past years, the region has seen a strong demand for this kind of work, for better tools, for better information, and for better systems to support monitoring and evaluation. At the same time, on the supply side, we've been very fortunate to see a huge growth in the tools, the technology, the processes, and the instruments and platforms to support M&E processes. As we all know, they're very information intensive, and the fact that we've seen the growth of systems and data tools that allow us to take this information and process it, and not only collect it, store it, but access it and use it for making policy decisions that are going to lead to more effective programs and interventions. Where the network has come in recent years is bringing the supply and the demand together. The network in Latin America began in 2005. It's the regional M&E network, and its goal was to bring the suppliers and the providers and the demanders for M&E information together to exchange good practices, to learn from one another, to see what works. And I'm very happy to see that now this information, this network, the products that are produced as a result of it are going beyond just the region and are going out into the other parts where the bank works. In addition, the network began, and it was mainly just a conference. In 2005, there was the first conference here in the World Bank. The second conference was also here in Washington, and then there was conferences in Lima and in Brazil, and last year in Colombia. But beyond that, last year we also initiated a social networking platform for M&E to make this sharing of information more continuous throughout the year. And this, I wanted to share with you this graph, which I think shows how quickly in 1 year this network has grown. We started just last year, right before the conference in Bogota, and we now have almost 1,500 members. About 50 new members come every week who are interested in learning about what's going on in M&E tools and in information. Just a bit of background. In the network itself, we have 25 countries in Latin America, 58 countries from around the world. And in the past 3 years, we've been creating national chapters that complement the regional chapters. And I think the chapters are in Brazil and in Colombia and more recently we're hoping to create one now in Mexico in the coming year. And I think it's important to stress why we need both regional M&E network as well as local chapters, and I think the statistic at the bottom really makes that quite clear. When you look at the social networking site for just the region, we have 473 visits from 20 Brazilian cities. But when you look at the Brazilian site, I think some of it must be the language factor, but we see over 7,000 visits from 119 Brazilian cities seeking information on what is happening in Brazil on M&E. There is a huge, the point here, there's huge demand, and there's huge demand to customize these services to not only national conditions, but to bring them down at the subnational level, where we're seeing a huge expansion in our clients' interest in M&E support. Just to give you a bit more background, who's interested in this? Well, of course, it's public sector experts and workers, but it's not only them, it's the consultants and it's also the private sector. And I think the testimony to the strength of this network comes that most of our membership are referrals, people who were referred to joining by a colleague or another professional. We have some other basic demographics here at the bottom. Women are underrepresented, just 40% of the affiliation, and most of our members are between the ages of 26 and 55, I guess. Thank you. Just in closing, I'd like to introduce the work that you're going to see is, as you know, the proceedings of the last conference, and I think it provides an excellent overview of the lessons that we've learned in LAC over the last 5 years, but also really draws in some of the best experiences, as you can see from the video, from other countries in the world, South Africa, Sri Lanka, and also the OECD countries. So I think it's two for the price of one. Not only are you learning about LAC, which is one of the most advanced regions, I think, in doing work in this area, but the publication will also bring to you lessons from around the world. So without much further ado, I think I'll turn it over to Gladys, who can share with you some of the main findings.
So, well, thank you very much for coming, and also I want to introduce some colleagues who are being part of this effort, which has taken a lot of effort and a lot of dedication. First, we have our colleagues from the IDB, Katia and Heraldo. Thank you for coming to this presentation. Also, Manuel, Fernando, Berta, Briceño also helped to organize this conference, so it's a collaborative effort, and Joao. So we thought it was important to put the proceedings of the conference in a publication, since we had speakers and presentations from different countries. And let me brief you about the outline of the presentation. First, I will talk about the context for the LAC conference, then some emerging trends from the conference, and then lessons from the conference. In terms of emerging lessons, I think it was very positive to see that there was a lot of growth in supply and demand for monitoring and evaluation. Also, that countries are taking this effort very seriously and trying to be innovative in providing efforts for providing the adequate institutional arrangements. And then in terms of lessons, I think as a collaborative effort, it was clear that first, it is important to continue working on incentives for the use of monitoring and evaluation in policy making. Then also to find systematic ways for the use of M&E in the policy cycle, in the planning, budgeting, monitoring, and evaluation of programs and projects. Then also to be innovative in strengthening regulatory frameworks for M&E, particularly in the part of information, laws of access of information, how to improve the quality of information. And then also we had a very good presentation from the New Zealand speaker, which shows how they are using new technologies in order to further disseminate the M&E information. Then, of course, it's the issue of how to sustain the capacity, because this is a long-term endeavor. It's not only one-time effort. It takes a lot of, it requires a lot of effort, and it's important to have the adequate tools in order to enhance capacity. And then monitoring and evaluation in weak institutional setups. How to start, how to build first, how to prioritize in this context. So the LAC M&E conference was very successful in convening practitioners from several countries. We had more than 350 participants. It was not only, we didn't only have government officials, we had think tanks, we had international organizations, and then more than 30 countries were represented in this conference. The evaluations from the conference show that the speakers rated as good or very good, and that they looked forward in terms of engaging in the M&E network. As I mentioned, there is a much growing supply and demand for monitoring and evaluation. On the demand side, in all cases and countries that were presented in this conference, there was the increased demand for effectiveness and transparency for public expenditures. That was a demand either for the constituencies or for the government, but it was a constant factor in all the cases. Then also, it was an increased demand for information frameworks and systems in order to improve the delivery of programs. On the supply side, also, we witnessed growing availability of new monitoring and evaluation technologies and tools which are being used and piloted in some countries like Mexico or Brazil. And also, as I mentioned, countries have taken this very seriously. They have established high-level government agencies devoted to monitoring and evaluation. There were several cases in the conference presenting their advances, such as Mexico, Spain. Then it was also important to strengthen the legal and regulatory framework. Loss of access of information has been implemented in some countries, but it was clear that a lot of effort is needed in other countries in order to try to further push this openness to data and information. And also, there were some interesting exercises in terms of how to link more systematically M&E results to the budget cycle, to planning and to budgeting. So in terms of what are the lessons that the book collects from these practitioners? First is the need to create more incentives. Incentives that encourage programs and agencies to undertake monitoring and evaluation. OMB presented there a recent fund which was launched by President Obama to encourage evaluation in programs, and also rewards for the implementation of these recommendations. South Africa has changed its approach towards auditing to more on how to manage the results for evaluation. And then Sri Lanka presented a recent initiative on managing for development results to encourage results-based management in government. I think there was a collective agreement that creating incentives for evaluation is a hard task. Why? Because most of the systems have focused on sticks rather than carrots. There is a lot of emphasis on audits, on controls, more than on how to use the results for evaluation. And the evaluators are afraid also to take into account these recommendations. Also, it was clear that the effectiveness of the M&E system depends on the buy-in and ownership from stakeholders of the results. And then there is the need to establish more systematic feedback arrangements in order to integrate results to policy making. Also, there was the sensation and also the discussion that there has been some attempts to link more systematically evaluation results to monitoring and evaluation, to policy planning and budget process. But so far, these processes have been ad hoc and have depended on champions or have depended on specific situations. There are some models which have been developed in the region, like the Chile model, which is much focused on budget, and also some other models on planning, and Brazil created a recent hybrid in terms of performance management. However, as I mentioned, the connection is still weak. There are still ad hoc arrangements that depend on the governments and that are not fully institutionalized, so that to achieve this requires some other either institutional arrangements and also the adoption of innovative methods that can stay in the government independently of whether the people leave the government. And also I think there was a collective agreement that these models are dynamic. They are evolving, and it's not, we cannot classify one model as, for instance, in the case of Chile, as a budget model. They are rethinking how to re-engineer their model under this new administration. So this need of feedback and adapting and improving the M&E model is important. In terms of information, as I mentioned, there has been some innovative initiatives in the case of Chile to make this information more easily and widely available to key stakeholders in Congress and public sector. India and New Zealand also show their loss of access to information and how they are providing feedback to the system either through scorecards or through other methods in order to assess the quality of information. But in general, a main challenge remains for governments in order to promote access to information, which is not easy because usually this information is very raw, very difficult to absorb, very difficult to digest. So it's very important on how to make it more easily for dissemination and also to target this information to key stakeholders so that they use this information. And then I think this is also a very important point from the conference. Several speakers presented new ways to manage and share information. People are increasingly using either web or other type of information technologies to disseminate information. That's something we are doing here in the LAC region with the leadership of João. And that's something that encourages people to share and be innovative in terms of the M&E system. Also, for instance, UNDP recently launched a very nice network in order to share this information in a global platform. Also, another important aspect in the conference is the need to establish participatory arrangements in order to get the feedback from community and other stakeholders. New Zealand, for example, presented that aside from their formal monitoring and evaluation system, they also get information from other non-government systems such as Rate My Teacher web service. The New Zealand speaker mentioned that sometimes they don't get fair comments, but that they need to be open and be able to incorporate those comments and respond to them. So I think it's important to continue working with other international agencies to provide this global platform and share best practices and knowledges. And also governments need to be aware and need to be open to other type of information or criticism from other organizations. It's very important how to open these systems to other stakeholders so that the information is being used. And then this is another important issue, which is increased capacity for monitoring and evaluation. I think there are some very good recent attempts in order to provide this capacity building more systematically, such as the regional knowledge centers launched by IEG, then the efforts to develop and strengthen regional and national monitoring and evaluation chapters, which is done in Latin America. And also there, were presented cases in terms of trying to diversify more training, trying to make it more tailored to the needs of the countries. For instance, training in various locations and languages, which is delivered by gifted. Then there are some other attempts in either to train trainees or certified trainers. And then it's important in this process to start always to measure the performance gaps in order to target the type of capacity. And also we discuss ways to assess M&E capacities and provide feedback. And also, I think above all, we agree that it's important to try to continue finding innovative ways to deliver this training. There are some programs which seem to be successful, that, like the peer-to-peer program in OECD countries, which now is adopted in case of Colombia. So I think it's important to continue being creative and innovative in this area. Then, although it was not the main topic of the conference, we talked about monitoring and evaluation in weak institutional setups. Some speakers, Fernando Rojas, for example, delivered a very good presentation and mentioned that it's important to build some core blocks so that M&E is absorbed in government. And it's important that along the efforts of constructing M&E, also these basic steps or basic blocks are built in the countries. Also identify entry points and momentum. I think it was clear in the conference that all these systems that have been created for the past 20 years, at least in case of Latin America, were not created overnight. It has taken effort, it has taken leadership, direction, momentum, and also re-engineering when things were not working. So it's important to find entry points and to gain momentum and leadership in order to expand this process. And then finally, to invite you to the 6th conference of the Monitoring and Evaluation Network, which will take place in Mexico in in August 25th. And here is the logo of the conference. And in this website, you have information to download, more information about the conference and also the agenda. And also next week there is the meeting, is the second meeting, of the Brazilian M&E chapter. And also it's available in the website, the agenda, and also if you want to participate, maybe online, that will be welcome. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you, Gladys. I suggest that before we open the floor for questions and discussion, that we go to our 2 panelists. So let me start with our external guests.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much for inviting me to participate in this roundtable. It is nice to meet with colleagues and think about why the work we do on a daily basis of designing and promoting rigorous monitoring and evaluation systems is so important, and try to take a step back at some of the issues. It is better yet in the context of discussing the presentation of this publication that I received the electronic copy, and I was not at the meeting, but for what I can see from the book, it was a great success in terms of the variety of participants and getting perspectives of the practitioners of the people that are intended to be the users of evaluations. So I think this is also a very, very important issue. And this is, the topic about how to institutionalize a monitoring and evaluation system, I think, is a very important challenge, not only for countries, but also for development agencies such as the World Bank or the IDB. I think that we have a large number of successful stories of monitoring and evaluation at the project level, where we can say this was very useful, both for I mean, for a variety of purposes like transparency, accountability, and most importantly, lesson learning. I think maybe stretching it too much, but Oportunidades has been shown or claimed to be like a very important program because the evaluation allowed to do several different things like improving technical issues about delivery of some nutrients, all the way to keeping the program in operating with the same core objective. And I guess from these kind of experiences, we often claim, well, we need to move from one project to several or many or all of the projects that we work with. We want to move from social sectors to other sectors. We want to move then from the project level to the national level, and then we want to go back to the subnational level. So I think we need to step back and say, why do we want to institutionalize? What is the objective that we are trying to meet by doing this? At the project level, we know that rigorous M&E arrangements are a useful management tool. There's no question. When comprehensive M&E systems or arrangements at the project levels are designed as such, and they are an integral part of the activities of the project, we are in a win-win situation. Monitoring allows us to track progress of products and outputs, and even outcomes at the beneficiary level. And evaluations allow us to deal with attribution and causality when it takes the form of an impact evaluation. And there's a very nice interaction where when monitoring poses the question that evaluations need to answer. No? I mean, the agenda of evaluation should come from the implementation of the project and identify which are the unknowns that we want to look at. And as Gladys mentioned, I mean, we know evaluations need to be useful. They need to provide concrete information, and we need to have, so that means we need to have recommendations, and we need to monitor those recommendations so that they are used. So the full cycle of evaluation in the project level should include recommendations, validation of recommendations by the project team, and then the follow-up on those. However, when we move from the project level to the systemic level, the challenges not only increase, but they accumulate, because we have to meet all these same demands or same expectations that we have for a single project evaluation. And then we need to meet some other demands that we have at the more systemic level. Because now M&E serves another project. So this is when we see the tension, say, between accountability versus lesson learning. Everyone can and should learn from evaluations, but different stakeholders learn different things from the same reports, right? So a project team may read from an evaluation how to improve. They try to say, okay, we have these drawbacks, how can we improve the implementation? But a higher level or other offices, maybe they're looking about, well, what project makes sense, which projects are good investments and which projects are not. And we need to be aware of who's going to read and what each actor is going to take from evaluations when we design them in order to address them in a fair way. We can say that more or less, and this is much less than more, but we know more or less what the recipes for evaluations to be successful at the project level are. No? We know that they should be considered since the design. They should be like M&E in a comprehensive way, and they should be integral part of the project, where integral does not preclude the need for independent assessment, but the idea is to have this be part of the day-to-day work of projects, should be the monitoring and evaluation. That implies that we need resources, we need precise timeline, and we need a lot of work in order to do this work correctly. So in theory, at least, we know more or less where to go. But when we go to systems, I think that the question is much open still. So let me just mention, some very brief topics about the systemic. I think the main question we need to know is, what is the purpose of the system, of the M&E system? If we want to institutionalize a system, we need to answer and be aware of the different objectives that we have. Because we have accountability, that's probably where we started. We also want to learn, So learning is another important issue. Accountability, when open to the public, leads to transparency, and in democratic systems, that's a very important issue as well. And we want to be a tool for planning. So that can also happen at two, or at least at two levels: the strategic level, like the conceptual discussions of how we should be addressing a particular, let's say, health problem, and how we have different evaluations or different theories that we want to talk about. And then, and this is, I guess, a very important challenge, is how do we translate this into budget decisions? At the end of the day, the budget is that revealed preference of what the government wants to do. So if we are not able to translate in a way all the M&E work into the budget, then it's an interesting exercise, but the relevance might be a little bit questioned. So once we analyze these objectives, we need to see what are the provisions that we need to take so that the M&E system meet the objectives. And this takes us to the question, how do we design effective institutions? And having worked in evaluations, we know that we know very little about the institutions, right? How do we do an evaluation of institutional reform or institutional build-up? It's a very difficult stuff. So we're now victims of that same issue. How do we design evaluations that can help? However, we agree, I think, in the need for relevance. Institutions need to have a very clear objective or a very clear sense of what the mission is. And in the M&E system, I think the relevance that we can agree on is that the information needs to be used. And that's exactly the topic of the next conference. And I think that's a very important one, on how to guarantee that this information, just as in a project, we know that if we don't do recommendations, validation and follow-up of those recommendations, the exercise is kind of meaningless. When we move to institutions, we need to have this parallel framework. So I just want to finish up illustrating this with a recent experience that some of you may know from the IDB in terms of the evaluability of projects. This is an interesting story. Berta knows it very well. So here we define and say, okay, we want evaluability to mean that projects are set up in a way that results will be measured, and the logic of the project or the theory of change behind the project will be validated or tested, not validated. Hopefully it will be validated. So this has been a very long exercise. In 2001, the Office of Evaluation did the exercise, and basically they said we have very bad results. In 2005, they repeated the exercise, and they said, well, we still have very bad results. But they went a step further, and I think it was very useful because they said, why do we have bad results? Right? And there was a very clear governance issue. No one was responsible throughout the project preparation cycle on taking care of these evaluability concerns. So how can we expect when we go to when we look at the documents at the end to find projects that have the requirements that we want without them being someone responsible? So now we started to change things, and now for each project that we have, we approve the development effectiveness framework, and every product in the bank, be it a country strategy, a project, a private sector project, public sector project, or knowledge project, has to have a validation, what we call the development effectiveness matrix, that it's basically asking the right questions at the right time. However, in the first stage when we implemented this, it was, we did this, and project teams members participated, but there was not really a bind. We didn't have it was not very clear the relevance, in the sense that nothing happened if you didn't do it too well, right? So then we go a step further, and this talks about sticks and carrots, and this is more stick than carrot. But at the end of the day, we say, we have this project, we have this index, and projects that do not meet certain threshold won't be able to move further in the project cycle. If we don't have a meaningful evaluation and monitoring and evaluation plan, the logic of the program is not clear, if we don't have indicators, we won't move forward. However, we also offer some help. We offer some carrots in saying, hey, we can work together with you at any stage of the project in order to develop and meet these requirements. So I think this illustrates the difficulties in trying to institutionalize, because we're trying to have a little, something that we will ask governments to do, trying to do it ourselves, and it's hard. And say now, let's assume that we're able to succeed in these and have projects that have good plans. Then the next question is, what are we going to do with the evaluations, with the findings that we get? Are we going to be able to, we need to learn from them. This will inform policy dialogue, and we can go to governments and say, we know that training programs under these circumstances don't work too well, but we also need to develop alternatives. So I think this kind of illustrates the very broad type of challenges. So I guess my point with all of this is to alert and say, hey, yes, we want to do, we have nice stories at the project level, and we want to take it a step further. But we need to be clear about what are the objectives we want to play, and be aware about the differences of the audiences that we have, of the purposes we're trying to achieve, and don't lose track that we still need to satisfy the first level of the project level when we start to move further to sector and national levels. So I think this book is, very interesting. It provides, I guess, this idea of having practitioners and having this exchange of opinions guided by some thematic issues is a very good one, and I'm looking forward to the next conference and learning more about how people use the results from their evaluations. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Pablo, and thanks for, I think these are excellent points. I think the challenge of institutionalizing M&E and moving beyond project M&E to more systemic-wide. We know a lot of what works, but it's often, as Gladys was saying and you're saying, ad hoc, I think, and it depends on champions, and the idea of maintaining it over time is a challenge, as well as using it for policy making. So thank you. And now let me turn the microphone over to Manuel.
Thank you, Louise, and thank you, Gladys, for the invitation to comment on this very important knowledge material that you are launching today. And I'd like also to congratulate the editors, Gladys, Katia, Alicia, and Elena have put together the publication very nicely. And but before I start, I also would like to say that the PREM team and our Inter-American Development Bank colleagues deserve an additional congratulation, not only for the initiative of creating this network 6 years ago, but especially for the successful effort to sustain the network over 6 years. And I really think, having been part of the network since the beginning, that the network is truly now the real source of the knowledge material that this publication is providing. It's really a live inter-exchange of knowledge and experiences. So I think that's very important to emphasize. As a government official, I celebrated the idea of the network when back in 2005, Ernesto Mejia and Jaime, Saavedra, Fernando Rojas, and my predecessor, actually, Keith Mackay and I invited a number of officials from Latin America to have the first meeting of this network. And my impression is that the network has really become a powerful tool for the development of monitoring and evaluation capacities, and also a truly effective mechanism South-South and North-South learning among the countries and in the region. So, but it's also important to sign out that in contrast to the situation 6 years ago, we are now at a time where most of the development community is already pretty aware of the importance of monitoring and evaluation, and that didn't happen at that time. That didn't happen in the governments, and that didn't happen even here in the bank. And so we at least no longer have to assume anymore the so difficult task of convincing our colleagues within the bank and within the government, the practitioners, to the importance of the monitoring and evaluation practices. Today, on the contrary, there is a broad consensus that a well-performing economy rests on a foundation of good governance, which in turn involves, we all know, good policies built upon transparent and predictable decision-making and implementation, oversight mechanisms and managerial controls that ensure accountability in how the resources are used, capable public officials committed to the achievement of social goals, including the efficient delivery of public services, and of course, a political process that at the country level is broadly viewed as legitimate. And today we know that all these issues reinforce one another, and we have learned and we have also noticed that, particularly through this network, through these discussions, that M&A systems, when properly institutionalized, play a critical role in facilitating such mutual reinforcement. So, within that context, I think that multilateral organizations have become particularly active in the field of M&E, and the bank has definitely assumed a leading role. Today, the bank devotes more resources to evaluation than most other developing institutions, and as a result of that, annually produces a wealth of insights, methodological approaches, recommendations coming both from AAA work and economic and sector work, and also from the monitoring and evaluation of its own activities and projects. But in parallel, something I like to emphasize is that perhaps more importantly, today the bank also conducts extensive evaluation capacity development work, a concept that involves not only different training modalities, but also advisory services, research and knowledge products, and support to the development of regional and country communities of monitoring and evaluation practitioners and experts. So I think the publication that is being launched today is a concrete result of the latter ECD type of work. And in the publication, we can find a handful of relevant M&E experiences, a handful of elements on current discussions about models, approaches, methodological tools, and similarly important, the identification of success factors and obstacles that different countries face in different times. Basically, around 30 countries that participated in the network in the last meeting. So all of this practical knowledge definitely should help other government officials, academics, and development practitioners from Latin America and from other regions in the world to identify challenges and opportunities for the institutionalization of monitoring and evaluation systems in their own contexts. And from the many important elements contained in the publication, some of which Gladys has highlighted here very nicely, I would like to extract and emphasize two main points, which I think are very relevant, just to bear in mind for all of us. One is that developing and institutionalizing monitoring and evaluation system is more difficult than it looks. And this may sound straightforward, but it's really a complex task. And we can notice it when we have these discussions with practitioners and with experts. This is not just a matter of setting up methodologies. There is much more involved. And the experiences here contained show us very nicely how the systems are normally subject to a large number of political and technical constraints. And I can mention some of them. There is a long list, but I would just like to mention some of them to put us all in the context of the discussion. From a political point of view, M&A systems, for instance, need to be in line with broader political objectives of reform, with democratization efforts, with state modernization efforts, with transparency efforts at the whole of government, and therefore that requires a strong high-level buy-in from both the executive and the legislative branches, and often too endorsement from civil society organizations. And from a purely technical perspective, as Pablo has also emphasized, M&A systems demand soundly designed and implemented tools, robust methods, and sound institutional arrangements, but require first and foremost readily available and good quality performance information, as Gladys was emphasizing. And both these political and technical aspects, these constraints or pre-requirements, are complex, are long-term, and rarely coincide in one particular country or government setting. And that's what makes this so complex. Therefore, developing systems in countries implies building the capacities, or putting it in a different way, creating the conditions to ameliorate the constraints I've been mentioning, and to allow the systems to evolve and to get traction within a government in the medium and long term. So what I would like to emphasize here in this first point is that capacity building or evaluation capacity development is far much more than training. This is very key, and is far much more than a one-shot or short-term activity in working with the governments. The second point that I would like to make is that even if a country successfully deals with these aspects, when it comes to institutionalizing monitoring and evaluation systems, we cannot generalize solutions. And I think the networks show us very nicely that. And as in evaluation, often we find external validity problems. In institutionalizing M&E systems, we also find those kinds of problems. What works for M&E in Mexico may not work in India, South Africa, or Gabon. This is very important to keep in mind. For instance, an M&E reform implemented successfully in a centralized, unitary government may not work in a federal state. Simple as that. So the depiction of a country or of a number of countries' experiences cannot be translated seemingly naturally into a best practice receipt. That doesn't really work. So we know now that not only the political context matters, but also that the initial conditions, the specific point of departure of a country, can draw a technically very well-oriented M&E reform to a totally different result in different contexts. And I can share with you different examples. One comes to my mind that is, I think, very important. Why then the SIGOV monitoring tool that has been developed by the United Nations Development Program and that has been spread out in mainly all Latin American countries and many African and Asian countries. Why then, to our knowledge, in the only country that has worked is in Colombia as an effective monitoring tool? There are, in that particular example, both political and technical reasons. So this is something very important for us to consider. So what are then the policy implications from these 2 points that I have brought to the discussion? First, I think that there is an evolutionary approach underlying the institutionalization of monitoring and evaluation systems that we need to bear in mind. Systems are very dynamic and are subject to periods of rapid progress, stagnation, and setbacks. And we see that in many of the cases that have participated or have been presented in the network. And that evolutionary approach makes many of the details of successful design and implementation very, very country specific. Very country specific. But nevertheless, we can also identify some basic patterns. Perhaps more rightly, as Gladys suggested, some prevalent trajectories, I will call them, that may deserve for sure more attention. Some examples include the so-called budget-oriented approach or budget-oriented model, as in the case of Chile, or the planning-oriented model, as in the case of Colombia, and I would say partially in Brazil, Costa Rica, or the social policies model, as in the case of Mexico, a particularly evolving monitoring and evaluation system. And there might be others too. So these trajectories, if we accept they exist, are very different from one another in terms of drivers, constraints, and risks, and even in challenges. And they are key to understand how M&E systems may evolve over time in different contexts, but they are certainly not a taxonomy, a standard path that can be used for or as a definite analytical base. See, that doesn't work. that way I will say. And the second policy implication, perhaps relevant, is that neither of these trajectories that we can identify is better in some absolute sense than the others, as sometimes has been suggested. This is very important, and I'm referring in particular to the budget-centered model. So rather each of these is more likely to be a better fit for some country circumstances than in others. So, and that's why I think this publication and the network of practitioners that is behind is important, because the lessons from many practitioners from the different countries and experiences can really help us all, and governments and multilateral organizations, understand the real and not only the theoretical constraints and challenges that lie behind institutionalizing human systems, and hopefully also help identify different and innovative and sometimes less dogmatic manners to address those challenges. In IEG, we strongly believe that collecting and systematizing country cases and lessons from many practitioners and reinforcing the knowledge building through networks is a very powerful way of ensuring learning and innovation in countries and regions. That's why we have supported the network since the origin. We are part of the network and we keep supporting it. But there is nevertheless an important concern that we have, that I want to share with you in this discussion, with the approach that we have been following and that we are following at the present. And it's this. Currently, network building are fundamentally multilateral and donor-driven efforts. So even in middle-income countries, or when we involve middle-income countries that, as Louise and Gladys have shown us, are very active now in working with monitoring and evaluation. They are doing a lot of activity in this, are investing a lot in this. So countries, practitioners, academic institutions, and the governments still rely, I will say, almost exclusively on World Bank and multilateral funding and leadership for setting in motion and maintaining this kind of networks. And my perception, and perhaps the comment I wanted to share with you, is that if this approach is to succeed as an effective and broader scope capacity development mechanism, network building initiative in a new context of growing demands for monitoring and evaluation will need to become more embedded in the regions and in the country institutions in the regions. So there is a need to find new ways for having more active leadership from the countries themselves, I believe. Because that is what institutionalization is about. When we talk to institutionalization, it's about that fundamentally. These are really embedded in practice as part of government day-to-day activities, countries' day-to-day activities. So I think really that once the seeds have been planted and started to flourish, they need to be self-sustainable. And then development organizations, we ourselves at the bank, should then, from a certain point on, start playing more of a steering, catalytic, and brokering than overrowing role in these networks. Of course, that doesn't apply the same to the different regions, because there are regions that are more that are behind than others. But this is very important. So I think there is a challenge for multilaterals and for donors to identify the right moment and also to be willing to follow a somewhat different approach to evaluation of capacity development, particularly in these areas. This is not to say that we should take a part from this effort and continue to support it, and we will continue to support it, but just some concerns that we should perhaps consider in our own discussions as policy considerations for the future. Again, thank you very much, Louise, and congratulations for the tremendous contribution you are doing with this publication.
Thank you, Manuela. I'd like to, I'm very interested, I think for us, the regional networks and particularly the country networks and the social networking side are key to actually making this owned by the countries and our clients. Let's open the floor up for comments, questions, and reactions. We'll take a few and then we'll conclude with Jaime. Go ahead. Any more comments? Yes. To make sure I understand, you're talking about more within the bank, or you? Because these questions are difficult, so I think I could want to leave a little bit of time for Jaime. Briefly.
Yeah, as Louise said, all the comments were very interesting. On the first one, where to put the M&E system. I think what we have witnessed during the past conference is that there is not a single model. It pretty much depends on the objectives of the M&E system. Why is that the government set up in the first place? It's set up because they want to increase program management, or they want to increase or to improve planning, or they want to link more systematically results to budget, or because they want accountability and credibility, and also depends on the context of the country, because as we indicated and is in the book, what worked or has worked in the Mexico model might be very difficult to replicate in other contexts, because the institutional setup might not be suitable for that particular model. And as Frederick Martin, I think in the video, summarized very nicely, the idea is to have this overview and to choose and pick, I mean, what is the best or what makes sense for another country to get from a different model. And I think that could be a good mix for a country that wants to engage in this M&E system. In terms of how,
There's a point you want to make specifically on one.
in the M&E network, the M&E network so far has been informal, and we have maintained it informal because I think once you make this type of arrangements formal, then kind of put all members in a constraint. No? I think it has been with partnering with the IDB or with countries because we really believe on this, because we think it's important to foster this type of engagement. Otherwise, I think if we don't believe on this, the countries do not believe on this, even if we have the agreements, we'll have died in the first place.
Let me just add on that.
Yeah, just to add to the first question. Is that allowed the language?
It's just part of that expression.
Just to. Just to add on the first question, yeah, the key point perhaps is that M&E tools and methodologies can serve different purposes, and it's then up to the government settings and where the champions within government really are, which type of purpose they want really to follow. Is it an accountability or fiscal control type purpose, or is it a managerial, more close to policy decision-making type of monitoring tools? So that's fundamental. And we can see cases, we see actually cases where one it's or has more emphasis than the others, or where there is a combination of these things. But perhaps that goes back to the point that Pablo was making. When countries are just starting to set up M&E systems, which might attempt to integrate different kind of activities that the governments already do. This is not something that starts from scratch. Governments are already doing things. And when they take decisions to systematize their M&E functions, they attempt to integrate different type of M&E work that is being done in different agencies and different levels of government. So there is where these key questions, what do we want M&E for, should be addressed.
Very briefly, I mean, how to make evaluations or this kind of work more influential. I guess we need to have in mind that, as Gonzalo from Conevalo was mentioned, evaluation is a political process with some technical elements. So, and not the other way around. So this is a very gradual thing. I mean, I guess from the start, I mean, just putting the example of the IDB, of course, there are going to be some bad projects we have to approve, but hopefully it's going to be less and less of them. I mean, you have to, you always have some, I mean, it's a political institution and it's a political process, right? So when you are able to measure and to document and before we didn't know what the status was, now we can say, for example, if we apply the standards we have today for 2008 or 2007, there would be several, like 15-20% of projects I would say wouldn't go. we hope this year it's going to be 5%. And we always have to have that room of maneuver because we always need to fund some things that governments really want and they need the financing, and we have to work with them.
I think we're running out of time, so let me quickly turn the microphone over to Jaime to close and talk about some of the broader implications and next steps.
Thank you, Louise. On the as you said, we started this like 6 years ago. So on the money side, it's like trust funds and a lot of imagination and a lot of begging, as you said. Let me be very quick. I just want to reflect quickly on why are we here. We're here because why were the other we care about the quality of public policies, and ultimately we want to be sure that public policies are shaped with the objective of improving people's welfare. And to better shape public policies, all the systems, at the end of the day, we can summarize what they do. We need to define what are those aspects that are key for people's welfare and where we need to make progress. And that is why we are always worried about setting targets on specific issues. And we need to know what are the key interventions that will help us achieving those targets. And that's why we do evaluations, all types of evaluations that have been described here. And we need to know if those interventions are on the right course and on the right track and are delivering the goods and services as planned. And that's why we need monitoring systems, right? So it's targets, evaluation, setting targets, evaluation, setting a monitoring scheme. This book and the presentations you heard discussed a lot about the institutional challenges in building systems, structures of incentives. And one thing that was also said was that monitoring systems, M&A systems, are still not yet embedded in the decision-making process. Well, our work in the bank and for teams in Latin America and in the other regions, our work consists on making sure precisely that happens, and making sure that information is scientifically produced in different types of evaluations and in the systems of monitoring indicators that feed policy design and policy decision-making process. The key challenge to improve the decision-making process is to insert M&A tools in the project and the policy cycle. We do this at the bank for our projects to monitor better what's happening with the resources that we lend. But in this work, teams do not generally care about bank projects. What we care about is about helping countries in the development on their own systems at the national, subnational, sectoral, and problem level. That is what all these networks of practitioners is about. It's basically about helping countries develop in their own systems. Now, having an M&A system really embedded in policy is at the heart of successful poverty reduction strategies, national development plans, or whatever name the country wants to give to their planning process. As part of those processes, countries have to define what's important for people's welfare. Is it infant mortality? Is it improving citizen security? Is it children malnourishment? So a key step is to define what are the results that are a priority first. How is that done? That varies dramatically from one country to the other. But if a country has defined priorities, then it's easier to build a monitoring and evaluation and information systems to assess if the country is making progress on those priorities. Have we really been successful in the bank in helping countries in building M&A systems? The bank has been working on this for a long time. I mean, M&A systems was part of the bank's advice on as part of the PRSP process. And one can say that in low-income countries, the success is mixed, too, in the best of the cases. In a few low-income countries, we can talk about systems that monitor results and use partially results of evaluation in the design of policies, but in many others, improvement even in data collection has been very weak. So our results in terms of how effective has the bank and the development community has been in terms of improving both data systems and improving M&A systems in low-income countries, I would say that is extremely heterogeneous. More and better progress in middle-income countries, but also heterogeneous. Now, another challenge that countries face is the definition of, once you have a target, is the definition, once you have a priority, is the definition of targets. When the country knows what's the right area of intervention, we need to ask ourselves, well, are we capable of improving that? Is it realistic? Is it feasible? And the definition of targets is a very complicated business. It's not the same saying we're going to reduce poverty than to say we're going to reduce poverty in 10 points in 4 years, right? Setting those type of targets scientifically is very complicated, although usually it's done happily as part of the political process, right? We're going to move from X to Y. Why from X to Y and why not to C? Well, not necessarily a scientific process behind. Targets have entered the development world strongly with the MDGs, are now key elements of many development plans, but setting them in a scientific way is a very complex task and is a long way to go in that regard. We don't do enough of benchmarking in order to set targets, so expanding the use of models and of benchmarking tools in order to do that is something that's part of our agenda, and there is a long way to go on that front. And once targets are established, then we need better, we will know better what is exactly that we need to monitor. Let me just make 2 quick points. One is that monitoring and evaluation is now as important as ever. The policy discussion has shifted a lot. There's much more consensus about what is needed for poverty reduction and to increase welfare in terms of low inflation, market integration, openness, etc. The discussion now lies more on how to achieve a higher quality of public interventions and higher efficacy and efficiency and more accountability in the use of public resources. And it's not, it's hard not to put these in the context of the post-crisis challenges lying ahead. For different countries, the fiscal challenges will be different. In some cases, going forward, there will be a need to reduce public expenditures in countries that are facing complicated challenges. But that reduction in public expenditures has to be done with a scalpel, not with a sledgehammer. And these M&A tools are precisely that scalpel. And in other cases, countries will need to increase expenditures. And in these days, spending with a focus on quality is really tough. And again, these monitoring and evaluation tools are key to know if you're spending right and if you're spending on the right things. Now, this crisis has shown that we're in a world of good performance at a very low levels or at undesirable levels. And up until the crisis, many indicators of monetary poverty, nutrition, health, education have improved, right? I mean, the world is moving in the right direction in the last decade. But in many regions, improvement has not been fast enough, and improvement has been dramatically heterogeneous across and within countries. Income inequality is in part a reflection of inequality of opportunity across population groups. Inequality in access to basic nutrition among children, to basic quality education among youth, in access to high productivity among young adults. And a public policy that works according to results, that is monitored, that's permanently evaluated, is critical to close those gaps. Only if we permanently move in the direction of ensuring that information generated by the monitoring and evaluation systems influences policies is that we are able to say that we're doing our homework. The role of the state, many say, will have to be redefined in this post-world crisis. The state will have to regulate better, will have to protect better, and will have to equalize opportunities. And not necessarily with a lot of resources. So in this context, the states knowing what works and what doesn't, which is one of the type of outputs of this type of system, is absolutely critical. And finally, to close, the topic of capacity building that several of you have mentioned. Creating capacity at all levels is one of the main objectives of the bank. One thing that we have learned during these years in this work is that there is no single good M&A system. That was your question. There is no template that can be replicated from one country to the other. Templates are not possible, not feasible. They're not appropriate. We always hear there is interest of learning about the Mexican case, learning about the Chilean experience, about the Colombian solutions, but in no case that can imply that one country adapting other countries' model. The institutional environments of each country is what define the right structure. So that is the way that to help a country has to involve, there's the reason why helping a country has to involve building internal capacity. so that countries, little by little, step by step, can engage in this extremely complex process in terms of defining what's the best system for them. And that is why it's critical to support countries in the development of a critical mass of experts and practitioners that can constitute an internal community. The existence of communities of practitioners at the country level are critical both to supply knowledge and expertise and to demand the use of eminent tools and information in the decision-making process. A lot of progress has been observed in the creation of those communities in a few Latin American countries, but much more effort is needed there and in many regions of the world. Thank you very much, and again, congratulations to the book.
Thank you, and thank you all for staying. And again, thank you, Gladys and Geraldo and others from the IDB for your support.